Sachiko Tanaka, 24 years old, stood near the back of the truck. She had served as a clerk in occupied Saipan, filing papers for officers whose names she barely knew. She had been told since childhood that Americans were devils, that they ate the flesh of their enemies, that they kept trophies made from the bones of Japanese soldiers. The propaganda posters showed American soldiers as grotesque caricatures, massive, animalistic, with hunger in their eyes for Japanese blood. As she descended from the truck, what she saw made her freeze mid-step. Standing in formation before them were not the monsters from the posters. They were soldiers, yes, but they stood at attention in orderly rows. Their uniforms were pressed, their expressions were neutral, professional, not savage, not gleeful. S-eyed Sachiko, 19-year-old Yuki whispered in Japanese, her voice trembling. They look like soldiers, just like our soldiers. Behind them, 28-year-old Tomoe said something that would echo through all 142 women. If the propaganda lied about this, what else did they lie about? The women were led to a section of the camp, designated as the women's compound. The barracks were simple but clean. Beds with actual mattresses, blankets, windows with light. In occupied territories, they had lived in cramped quarters, often sleeping on mats on the floor. But here, in a prison camp of their enemy, they were being given beds. Breakfast was served in a mess hall. The food was abundant in a way that seemed impossible. Eggs, bread, fruit, coffee. Things many of them hadn't seen regularly since before the war began. Yuki sat across from Sachiko, staring at her plate. "This is for prisoners," she whispered. "What must they feed their own soldiers?" Several women stopped eating, unsure if this was real or some kind of test. But the American cook, a sergeant named Robert Hayes, noticed their hesitation. He approached their table, his massive frame casting a shadow across their meal. The women tensed, preparing themselves, but Hayes simply smiled and gestured to their plates with a thumbs up. As if to say, "Eat." Then he moved to the next table and repeated the gesture. For the first time since their capture, something shifted inside them. Not quite relief, not quite trust. But perhaps the first crack in the wall of lies that had held their entire understanding of the world together. Week 2 at Camp Landing brought work assignments. The women were tasked with various camp duties, laundry, cooking assistance, maintenance. These were not cruel punishments, but practical assignments that treated them as capable workers, not subhuman prisoners. Sachiko was assigned to the camp library, helping to organise donated books and magazines. It was there she met Captain James Morrison, a 32-year-old education officer from Massachusetts, who had been tasked with setting up a re-education programme for German and Japanese prisoners. Captain Morrison spoke slowly to her, using simple English phrases and hand gestures. "Your name?" "Sachiko," she answered carefully, her English limited but improving daily. "Can you help organise books?" he asked, pointing to the piles. She nodded and began to work. Over the following weeks, Morrison would visit during his rounds, always asking questions, always encouraging her to practice English. One afternoon, after nearly a month at the camp, Sachiko gathered the courage to ask him something that had been troubling her since she arrived. "Captain," she began in halting English, "before we come here, propaganda say Americans are bad people, barbaric. But here," she paused, searching for words, "everyone is kind. Why?" Morrison considered the question seriously. He pulled up a chair and sat down, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "Because," he said slowly, "propaganda makes people into ideas instead of people. When you make someone an idea instead of a person, it becomes easy to hate them, easy to hurt them, but when you see a person, it becomes much harder." Sachiko absorbed this. The simplicity of the statement, the fundamental truth of it, struck her deeply. "In Japan," she said quietly, "we were taught that seeing the enemy made you weak." "In America," Morrison replied, "we're learning that seeing the enemy as human is the only thing that makes us strong." Those words hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of a truth that was changing both of them. November 1945 arrived, and with it came a decision that would ripple through the entire compound. Captain Morrison proposed that the Japanese women prisoners be included in the Thanksgiving celebration. Some camp officers objected. "These are the enemy. We lost men fighting them." But Morrison argued that understanding, true understanding, could only come through shared humanity. The camp commander, perhaps surprisingly, agreed. On Thanksgiving Day, the mess hall was transformed. The women were served turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, vegetables and pie. Food that American soldiers were eating. Food that civilians back home were eating. Tomoe stared at her overflowing plate with something approaching disbelief. The abundance was almost offensive. How could a country that was supposedly weak and failing feed its prisoners this way? Yuki, sitting beside her, whispered, "This meal costs more than what I ate in a month before the war ended." But it wasn't just the food, it was what the food represented. It was evidence of something their government had said was impossible. American strength built on abundance, not cruelty. American values built on something other than conquest. After the meal, something remarkable happened. Captain Morrison organised an informal discussion in the recreation area. Using translators, he asked the women a simple question. "What surprises you most about America so far?" The women exchanged nervous glances. This was a test, wasn't it? Some kind of trap? But Sachiko spoke first. "I am surprised that we are alive." The honesty of the statement hung in the air. Yuki continued. "I thought when I was captured I would not survive. But here I have survived, and I have been treated as a person." One by one, women shared their observations, the food, the safety, the fact that guards smiled sometimes, that they weren't beaten, that when they were ill, they received medical care. But beneath these surface observations was something deeper, a growing realization that everything they had been taught about their enemy was a fundamental lie designed to make them obedient, to make them not question. December brought the first snow of the season to Florida, unusual and shocking to women who had never seen it before. A group of women, including Sachiko, were outside during a recreation period when the snowflakes began to fall. They had never experienced snow before. Many of them stood transfixed, watching the white flakes descend like a miracle. Tomoe reached out her hand and caught a snowflake on her palm. It melted instantly. "In Japan," she said to no one in particular, "my mother told me that snow is a gift from heaven, that each snowflake carries a wish." Sachiko caught her own snowflake. "What would your wish be?" Tomoe was quiet for a long moment. That this moment, this strange, impossible moment where I am alive and safe and watching snow fall, that I would remember this forever, so that I never again believe lies about other people. It was in that moment that Sachiko understood something fundamental. They had already changed. They had already become different people than the women who stepped off that truck in September. They were no longer enemies. They were witnesses. They were evidence that transformation was possible even in the darkest circumstances. January 1946 brought difficult news. The American military began showing documentary footage of the liberation of camps in Europe and Asia. The footage showed the systematic machinery of death that the Japanese military had created in occupied territories. Some of the women in Camp Blanding had served in those territories. They had filed paperwork. They had taken orders. They had been part of a system, even if unknowingly, that had committed atrocities. Captain Morrison arranged for the women to view the footage if they chose to. He warned them that it would be difficult. Many of the women chose to watch. Sachiko watched images of suffering she couldn't reconcile with the kindness she had been shown. She watched footage of camps, of executions, of suffering inflicted by people who wore the same uniform she had worked alongside. When the footage ended, she sat in silence for a long time. That evening, she approached Captain Morrison with a question that haunted her. "How can you be kind to us after we were part of something so terrible?" Morrison sat with her in the quietness of the library. "Because," he said finally, "you are not responsible for what you didn't know, but now you do know. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" That evening, the women gathered in small groups in their barracks, wrestling with the cognitive dissonance that was becoming increasingly unavoidable. Tomoe spoke what they were all thinking. If they lied about how strong Americans were, if they lied about Americans being barbaric, what else were they lying about? What did we participate in? What are we guilty of? Yuki, her voice small. I don't know if I can forgive myself for not knowing. Sachiko had been silent through most of the discussion. Finally, she spoke. We were children when this started. We were taught to obey, not to question. We were told that obedience was patriotism. We couldn't know what we weren't allowed to know. But now we do know, Tomoe said, and we have to live with that. It was Sachiko who, after several nights of this wrestling, came to a difficult but necessary conclusion. We have been treated with humanity by people we were told to hate. That humanity has shown us the truth about ourselves and our government. The only way to honour that is to carry that truth forward. To never again accept lies about other people. To never again let ourselves be made into tools of hatred. The women sat in the darkness, each processing in her own way the uncomfortable realisation that their entire worldview had been built on deception. The women's time at Camp Blanding came to an end in early 1946. Many were eventually repatriated to Japan. Others found ways to remain in America, sponsored by families or organisations who believed in their transformation. But regardless of where they ended up, they carried with them the same realisation. The journey from enemies to people was not miraculous. It required only two things: proximity and kindness. When people actually encounter each other as human beings, when they share meals, exchange stories, experience vulnerability together, the propaganda falls away. The lies become obvious. The differences become less important than the similarities. Years later, when asked what changed everything, Sachiko would say, "It wasn't any one moment. It was all the moments, every kind gesture, every smile, every meal, every conversation. They showed us, without words, that we were wrong about them. And in showing us we were wrong, they gave us the chance to become right, to become human again." The Japanese POW women of Camp Blanding became ambassadors of an unexpected truth, that enemies can become people. That transformation is possible even after years of hatred. That kindness is more powerful than any propaganda. Their story reminds us that the greatest power we have is not military or political. It is the simple power of treating each other as human beings. If you found this story meaningful, please like and subscribe to learn more about the forgotten stories of women whose voices were silenced by history. In the comments below, tell us, what moment changed your understanding of someone you thought was your enemy? How have you experienced the power of seeing the humanity in others? Your stories matter. Thank you for listening.